Father in heaven, we thank you for your word as we're here trying to sort it all out. And Father, we do not want to be deceived. That's why we're here. And Father, we ask that your Spirit lead us and guide us. We claim again the promise of Yeshua, that you would lead us and guide us into all truth and show us things to come. Be with us now. We ask, may your Spirit lead us and guide us, cleanse us from all sin, that you can truly work in and through us. We pray in Yeshua's name. Amen. Okay, so we were talking about, we're obviously not going to go through all the information. We're going to look at kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so we want to do that. I want to introduce this kind of with Peter. Peter was a real student of prophecy. You read his couple little books that he had. We understand that the book of Mark was probably dictated almost by Peter. It should be, it might be more rightly titled the Gospel of Peter. But in Peter's little books, little letters that he has, he speaks quite a bit about prophecy, and it's quite important what he says. Here he says, "Therefore, brethren, be even more diligent to make your call and election sure, for if you do these things," he's just went through some real encouragement to hold fast, and he says, "Therefore, be diligent," and he says, "if you do these things, you will never stumble, for so an entrance will be supplied to you abundantly into the everlasting kingdom of our Lord and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah." Not just an entrance, but he's talking about an abundant entrance. It's like welcome home, and it'll be an abundant entrance if we do those things that he's talking about. "For this reason, I will not be negligent to remind you always of these things." So he's taking it upon himself. He's going to tell them over and over and over these things. He says, "Though you know and are established in present truth." Now this is kind of interesting here. They had present truth back there. Their present truth wasn't that there was a flood coming. That was present truth in Noah's day. Present truth in the time of Yeshua is that the Messiah had come, died, and was resurrected and was coming again. That was their present truth. That's truth, but today it's actually not present truth. Our present truth is what is just in front of us, what's going on in the world today. And so some of you, this might be an introduction to this truth, but it is present truth that we all need to understand today. And the reason why I say that is because that's what Yeshua said. He said, "Let the reader understand these things in the time of the end." So you've seen this slide here. We're going to have a showdown in the Middle East, which is on its way. That's what Yeshua said. When you see these things begin to happen, know that it's near. And this thing's been building for quite a few years, actually intensely, probably since 1948. And it's just been building ever since. As soon as the Israelis got their homeland, war broke out pretty much right away, and they've been fighting ever since. But it's culminating here. We can see it's going in a trajectory that could extend all over the world. Why do we say that? Well, because the ideology of Islam is to take over the whole world. And we've seen in the last several years, especially the last 20 to 30 years, they've gone all through Europe, approximately 9% on average in the countries of Europe, through Spain, and all the way into England now. There's a very high percentage of Muslims in those areas. And some people, your common person, wouldn't think, well, that's not really a problem. You know, they should be able to go wherever they want and live. But that's because we don't understand the ideology of Islam. And so it is a serious problem. I was told yesterday that in Fort Mac, which is kind of an interesting place, interesting hub, that probably about 10% of the population is Muslim. Now, one might have to ask, why Fort Mac? Well, that's a good question. Maybe because there's work up there, but maybe it's an area where we get a lot of petroleum products from. and they might want to have some control in those areas. If you're going to hit somebody, if the plan is to hit somebody, you want to hit them where it really hurts. You want to hit them in things that are valuable. And I believe, they're buying up gas stations and all kinds of things. And you have to wonder what's going on. You have a hard time defeating someone that's willing to strap bombs around them and walk into a crowd and just blow themselves up. And they have gained the victory because they get to go to heaven. And apparently there's 70 virgins waiting for them. I think I got that number. Is it 72? Wow. That'll make a real difference. But these are the things, and we do laugh. It seems quite funny, but these are the things. The important thing is not whether it's true or not, as much as they believe it's true. And that's what makes it dangerous. They take their theology extremely serious. There's anywhere between 1.5, 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. And even if there's a handful of those that are radical, that's not a good thing. That's nearly a quarter to a third of the world's population that believes some of these things. Now, somebody might say, well, they're not all radical. When you walk down the street and there's a woman that has these special head coverings, I'm not talking about the slits anymore. I'm not talking about that. That's way over the top. But when they have these big scarves on that are covering themselves, that's radical. That's the sect that's radical. And it really is interesting how the man will be walking there, and you can't tell he's radicalized, but you can tell he's radicalized by the appearance of his wife. That's how you tell. And so when they're dressed like that, those are radical. They take their religion serious. And their ultimate goal is jihad and take over the whole world and have Sharia law over the whole world. So once we understand that, it's not a prejudice thing anymore. It's an understanding of a religion that is radical. And their first goal is they want to kill the Jews, then they're going to kill the Christians, and then they're going to kill the infidels in that order. And that's their plan. I used to kind of question people when ISIS and these people were doing their thing. Oh, those are just the radicals. No. Those are people that are serious about their religion. They're actually doing what they're supposed to do. So once this works up into a frenzy, and usually it's just a small portion of a population, that's the way it was in Germany, a small portion of a population becomes radicalized, and then they gain power in the government, and then pretty soon everyone's under their control. That's just the way it happens. So we get to Daniel chapter 8, where we see insights into the abomination of desolation. And what it says in Daniel chapter 8 is very interesting. Daniel is told 3 times something very interesting in Daniel chapter 8. When he's given the understanding of the vision, he's told, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now, if you want to kind of get into this verse a little bit deeper, you can get different translations, and they flat out say, Daniel, this vision is for the time of the end. So the question is, when's the time of the end? Well, Yeshua's question that he was asked was a sign of your coming in the end of the age. He refers us back to Daniel, and then when we get to Daniel, oh, there's a vision about the time of the end. So this is all dealing with the information that Yeshua was asked the question about his coming. So then what we have in the vision is we have a war. Well, that's interesting. When we get to this chapter that involves the things that he was talking about, there's a war that begins the vision. Now that's pretty important because he said war would be the first thing that happens. It's not just any old war. It's a war of 2 enemies, and it will involve the whole world, and we're going to see that. Here again, in the same chapter, 2 verses later, Daniel really didn't understand what was going on when he saw the vision, and the angel Gabriel was instructed by Yeshua himself, I believe. He says, look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the Moedim, that's what it actually says, shall be the end. Now, has it been the end? Has the Moedim of the end happened yet? No. So it's still in front of us. So now he narrows in, not only this vision's at the end, but it's going to happen on time, which is what we should expect. Everything happens on time. Verse 26, same chapter, right at the end, he says, you are to keep the vision secret because it is about days in the distant future. Now we're talking 100 years or 200 years here. We're talking about days in the distant future. When the Bible talks like this, it could be thousands of years. That's where it's referenced in this. We see the same kind of expressions in Isaiah. Many days in the future, that could be thousands of years. The things that were forecasted in Isaiah's time, which was before Daniel's, he was told that certain things would happen many days in the future, and those things have not even happened yet. So this terminology is not just talking about 100 years or 200 years. We've been told twice that the vision is for the time of the end, and now he says it's in the distant future. So we're putting this information together 3 times in the same chapter. So now when we go to a different chapter in Daniel, Daniel chapter 10, is the beginning of another vision. Daniel chapter 10, there's a bit of a dialogue going on, and then when we get to chapter 11, it unfolds the whole vision. So when we compare Daniel chapter 10 through 12, we can see connections to Daniel, actually not just chapter 8, but we can see connections to Daniel chapter 7, which we're going to briefly look at here as well. So it's interesting, in the American Standard Version and in other versions, it reads like this. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, so that's the timing of the vision, a thing was revealed to Daniel whose name was called Belshazzar, and the thing was true, even a great war. So we see here in Daniel chapter 11, it also begins with a great war. And he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. So in verse 10:14, we want to get a little more information on that. And so now he's, just before he gets into the vision, he says, now I've come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days. Now that word latter days, interesting Hebrew word, it's last days. So this is talking about the time when Yeshua is going to come. And there again, that parallels with what Yeshua said. What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? This is talking about the same thing here. For the vision refers to many days. So we have that same terminology that was in Daniel chapter 8. We have the same thing in 10:14. And when we look at the substance of the vision, we know we're talking about the same events. But in Daniel chapter 10 through 12, we have much more detail. So 10 through 12 is all one vision, and 12 actually is a summation of the whole book of Daniel, and especially his prophetic insights. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, it says, but Daniel, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And then again, in Daniel chapter 9, or 12, verse 9, he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but when God says something once, it's important. But when he repeats it again, when you tell your child something once, it's important. But when you repeat it again, you're trying to make sure he got the point. So in Daniel chapter 8, 3 times, he tells him the vision is for the end. So I wonder if it's important if we understand that the vision is at the time of the end. I think so. We see the same thing in Daniel chapter 10 through 12. He's repeating the concept of the time of the end. So let's go back to chapter 8 and see what is going on. Chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, even to me, Daniel, after the one which appeared to me the first time. So what is he talking about here? He's referencing Daniel chapter 7 now, because the first vision Daniel had of the time of the end is in Daniel chapter 7. So he says it was after that one. But it's interesting, it's not only after in time, he had it after he had the vision, but it's after in kind also. Now, it doesn't say that, but when we look at the substance of the visions, we can see it's of the same information. Little different, but it is involving the same information. I saw in the vision that it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Now, where is this? We're going to see on a map where this is. But this Daniel at this time was in Iran. Today we would call it Iran, but in that time it was called Persia. And there's many people today that actually call Iran Persia because it is properly named as Persia. A lot of people don't really understand how the Arab world is put together, but Persia is not Arab. It's a different people group. Arabs are Arabs and Persians are Persians. And you can tell, actually, when you put them both together. You can see it's a different makeup of the individual. Most Persians are Shiite Muslim. It's kind of like Catholics and Protestants. And they've been fighting against each other. They've been trying to figure out who should be the boss for a long time. It's kind of like Catholics and Protestants in that way. But Catholics and Protestants, as we're seeing, they're really coming together. And you've probably noticed that. We're going to see the same thing happen with Islam. And I've talked to people about that pretend to know quite a bit about Islam. And they say, well, that will never happen. And I just say, just wait. Just wait. It's going to happen. Because they have to come together if these prophecies are going to be fulfilled. So this is where he is in the vision. And he's transported to the river, which is an interesting concept. God took him to the focal point of where this prophecy is going to unfold. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Now we're going to have a condensed little explanation of what this is. We've got an animal, and this animal has horns. There's no room for guessing here. We can know because the Bible interprets itself. An animal is a kingdom or a multi-nation kind of a corporation or a union of many nations together. And the horns represent the kingdoms that control the animal. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen these little go-karts where you go like this and you can steer. You put them on a hill and you can go like this. You guys ever seen those things? Well, I'm going to call those the horns, and you're sitting on the beast or the animal, and the horns are in control of what the animal is doing. That's where they get their information. So the horns on the beast actually control the direction of the beast. We see exactly the same thing, different animal, but we see exactly the same thing. We see a beast, a multinational beast in the book of Revelation, and there's a harlot riding the beast. So in that case, the harlot is directing the traffic, telling the nations which way to go. And so the beasts in the book of Revelation and in Daniel represent kingdoms. And when there's horns on the kingdoms, those are the kingdoms that are represented that control the animals. So this is what we're looking at. This is going to be explained. But for the sake of just knowing it right out of the gate, that's what we have here. So we've got a ram standing in a river over in Persia, as far as we know right now, over in Persia, in the time of the end, that is going to do something. 2 horns were high, but the higher one came up last. This is all not just ink and paper. This is important information as we go. These are details that are very important, and they represent something. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward so that no beasts or kingdoms, that's what it's talking about, no beasts, kingdoms might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will. This is really important here. He did according to his will. That means nobody tells him what to do. Now, I don't know if you've seen on the news or anything about Islam or what they're doing, the people that are radicalized. They're burning Canadian flags now. This is something I didn't think I would see. And they're being told that they shouldn't do that, but are they listening? No. No. Do you know why they're not listening? Because they believe that they actually own Canada. They just haven't. This is a fact. This is what they believe. We are in their way to take over the world. So when they come and they demonstrate, they believe they're on their own turf because it's theirs. Because Islam has the right to all countries, and they will lord it over us eventually. So they're actually in their own right. They believe what they're doing is their right to do, and they do according to their will, because their God is Allah. And Allah Akbar, does anyone know what that means? Yeah, God is greater, God is great. Their God is greater. So if your God is greater, then you have a right to the land. And this is the way they operate. Many people don't understand that, but when they're burning these flags, they're actually demonstrate it's time to go in. What does a conquering army do when they invade your land? Pardon me? Kill everybody. First thing they do is they take the enemy's flag down and they raise their own. That's what they do. That's exactly what they're doing. They're showing that they've invaded and they're taking control of the land. They are getting into position to do that. They are going to become great. And Islam is becoming very great. If we knew the arms race that's gone on in the Arab world and the Muslim world, it would make our heads spin. The amount of money. When they list the top 10 purchasers of arms, at least 5 or 6 out of the 10 are Muslim nations. And we're talking billions and billions and billions. And it doesn't help when we give the Afghanis $85 billion worth of premium equipment. I mean, and now they're one of the greatest arms sellers in the Muslim world because they have all this that they don't even have enough people to operate this stuff. So they are definitely becoming great. The prophecy goes on. Suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. This is really, really important. So at the time that this power in the Middle East, that's where this power is in the time of the end, at the time when it becomes great, suddenly something happens. A male goat, which is a union of nations, that's what these beasts are, comes from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. So where is this? This prophecy has been applied to Alexander the Great. Anyone that's done any theological studies or went to any kind of seminary will learn that this is talking about Alexander the Great. But we have a real problem here because Alexander the Great didn't live in the time of the end. It didn't happen. 3 times in the prophecy, it says that this vision is for the time of the end. On another note, he came across the Mediterranean, but us living in the time of the end, where the prophecy talks about, if we look at the specifications in the prophecy, it tells us something very interesting. It says that he came from the west across the Mediterranean. Is that what it says? Across the surface of the whole earth. Now, surely us living in the age of enlightenment, we know what the earth looks like. At least we know what a map of the earth looks like that they sell pretty much at any store that you need to buy a map at. When you look at the west, you know where that is, pretty clear. You know where the east is. And it says here that this goat comes from the west across the whole earth without touching the ground. Well, the only way you can get to central vision over in the Middle East is without touching the ground. It's not possible to get there on the ground. You have to either go in the air or you have to go by sea. But it says here that suddenly, now this word suddenly is kind of interesting. that's kind of out of nowhere. In other words, everyone's caught by surprise. Most people weren't watching for this thing to happen. So what they call this in military terms is a preemptive strike. Have you heard that before? So when they have a preemptive strike, is it kind of a surprise attack? It's a surprise attack because somebody's got some information that somebody's going to do something radical quickly. Or possibly that somebody has done something radical, and now this is an immediate attack. It could be one or the other, it could be both. But this power comes from the west across the surface of the whole earth, and the goat had a notable horn. If I was, what do I have here? I don't, oh, here. This will probably do it. Yeah, that's good enough. I can't hold everything. If I say that which one is notable? Pardon me? Oh. Why is that? It's different. The middle one is notable. There's one that's notable. It's the one that's different. So my point being is this is a multitude of nations here that are going to attack Islam. And there's a notable horn, one notable horn that is leading the charge. You see, the word notable is a comparative term. There isn't just one horn on this beast. It's a multinational beast that's made up of several horns. And we're going to find out the most important horns because the prophecy reveals exactly who those kingdoms are. But we know that there's a power that's leading this horn, and he comes across the surface of the whole earth, and it just happens to originate in the West. So do you know any countries that could be recognized as notable that come out of the West? You don't want to say it? The US. Oh, I was thinking Canada. I'm in good company here. I don't say those things in the United States. I'll be rushed out. Yeah, absolutely. There's only one nation that this could represent. And isn't it interesting that in the vision that we just saw, the ram pushed first in one direction? Do you remember which it is? These are all details that we need to remember. Not north. The ram, the first direction he pushed was west. Is Islam pushing against the west? Oh, yeah. That's the first direction that they're pushing. And this pushing is going to culminate with once they've pushed west as hard as they can push, they're actually going to break away a little bit and they're going to start pushing north. So if Islam was going to start pushing north, which direction would that be? No, that's over here. But where they originated from Iran. So Iran is kind of central to this whole thing. The Middle East is kind of central. If they pushed north, which direction would that be? Well, Europe is kind of west. It's northwest. So that's part of their push immediately is west. So that's into Europe and across the Atlantic over here. Well, the Middle East, if we're starting in the Middle East, I can see we need a map here. And no, I know you guys know your directions, but if you had the map in front of you, you'd see immediately where it is. That's up towards Russia. So the next direction they're going to push is up towards Russia. Now, Russia is allied with Persia and some of those Middle Eastern countries. But the reason is because allies grow together or come together because they have the same enemy. So Russia has the same enemy as Islam, and guess who it is? It's the West. It's just as simple as that. If you have the same enemy, you're going to work together. Well, when Islam is pushing and when this whole thing busts wide open and they make their move, they have it go time, they're going in all directions. They go west, they go north, and then it says they go south. And we're going to look at some maps here. This will be self-explanatory. So they're going to make their move at some point in the future. They're going to make their move on the world. Now, the Trojan horse is in place now. We have not just allowed them to come. We have bused them here. We have flown them here. We are paying for hotels. There was talk in the Canadian government just the other day, and you guys probably heard about this, that they are talking about buying hotels so that they can house these migrants that are coming in by the thousands. That's your tax dollars. Yeah. Did you vote for that, by the way? No. This is called a dictatorship. That's what it's turning into. And so this is what's going on here. And Ontario and Quebec are getting quite upset right now because most of the migrants are living in Ontario and Quebec. And those governments cannot afford to support this. And so they're on Trudeau's back about this. And so they have a plan to distribute all these migrants all over Canada. And I just heard today is Alberta, you're going to get your fair share. And also BC, we're going to get 35,000. Now, even if a few of them are radicalized, you know, some of these are not just coming in from the Middle East. They're coming in from Venezuela. They're coming in from China, military-aged men. These guys are ready to go. They're just waiting for the orders. I was watching a documentary in the United States because you can get arms pretty easy in the United States. They have actually training camps for these Muslims in the deserts and all of this stuff, and they're doing it. They're getting prepared to do what they're going to do. And legally, they can't stop them. That's the scary part, because they have these rights. So the notable horn, it looks like it's pretty obvious to me that's talking about the United States. So, oh yeah, we'll back that up. So it comes talking about coming from the west across the surface of the whole earth. Goes on in verse 7, and we want to pick up all these verses so that we can see that I'm not just stringing a bunch of verses here and there together. This is actually how the whole thing plays out. And I saw him come close to the ram. So this is the goat now. This is the goat kingdom. Come close to the ram. He was moved with choler. That's an old English word. It means absolute rage at its highest order. So this ram has done something that's raised the ire of this goat to the point where it's going to do something here. It says, it smote the ram, broke his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but the goat cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram out of his hand. This is where I get the concept, is that Islam is going to be completely crushed. The animal is going to be killed. It's going to be stomped upon. And the reason is because the world has finally realized the greatest threat to global warming is not, worrying about a few polar bears. It's worrying about Islam. Islam is the greatest threat to global warming. It was interesting. They asked Kamala Harris. They asked her the other day in an interview, and, God help her when she sits down to have an interview. Between the cackles, he said, what do you think the greatest threat to world peace is? And she said, Iran. That's a good answer. And he followed up with the question, well, why was it that your government gave them billions of dollars? And she totally changed the subject. She never answers questions directly. She just veers off on something else. Well, I was raised in a middle whatever home, yeah, okay. That's not the question. And it's just, they know what's going on, but they are in complete denial, and they will not tell us exactly what we're asking them. So we can see here, even people in high places understand the threat of Islam. But there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing. So this is this explains itself. So Islam is going to be crushed. And so somebody says, well, how that's going to happen? I don't see that's going to happen. Well, we can definitely see that Islam is on the rise. There's no disputing that. So how is it going to happen? Well, it's not going to happen under the Biden administration. Is there a Biden administration right now? Who's running that country anyways? I sure hope it's not Kamala. Yeah. Anyways, all joking aside, it's not going to be under that one. However, these countries are taking full advantage of the weakness of the United States right now. Russia is, China is, all our enemies are taking full advantage, and they're doing everything they can to get into position when it's go time. And that's what the Muslims are doing. It's going to take someone else to pull the trigger and do the dirty deed and finish off the Muslims. It's going to take somebody that understands what the Muslims are up to. It's going to take somebody that's a conservative to do it. It's going to take somebody that has religious people behind them, speaking to them, telling what the game plan of the Muslims are. It's going to be somebody that is in tune with the House of Israel and on board with supporting Israel. It's going to take somebody that's a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the other day when Kamala Harris was asked about Benjamin Netanyahu, is he your ally? She says, I want to rephrase that question. We're an ally of the Israeli people. Well, what did she just say? That she hates Benjamin Netanyahu. But I know somebody that's sort of trying to be the president that actually could sit down in a room with Benjamin Netanyahu and have an intelligent conversation about Islam. You see, that's where we're heading. That's why I believe it's go time, because we have the players in place to do what they need to do. The whole thing is being set up. And this will play out by the right players. Therefore, the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn, which is representing the United States, was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up. So this is kind of interesting. So it said here that there was a notable horn leading the charge. Did these other 4 notable horns, did they just appear out of nowhere? Or is it for the purpose of telling us that there were 4 other notable horns that were with the notable horn, and the notable horn was leading the charge with the 4 other notable horns, which would mean that there's other horns involved as well. We've got a multinational movement that's going to go against Islam, because the nations of the world are going to finally realize that Islam is our immediate problem. The Russians are going to realize it. The Chinese are going to realize it. These other countries have had their fill of problems with Islam. And if you've been following news, you know that. The Russians have had all kinds of problems. They were warring against the Afghanis for how long? Was it 15 years or something? They couldn't win. The United States goes in there, the world's superpower. They can't win either, and it ends in a disaster. You can't fight these people unless you entirely annihilate them. And this is how they're going to get rid of it. And this is what the prophecy describes. So after the war, after the victory that's led by the United States, it says that the United States is broken. Now, this is another interesting word. If you look that up in your concordance, it says crushed. Another word for it is crushed, or shattered, or exploded. These are all words that are not just, broken. This thing explodes. So it's talking about the United States. Well, we know up here in Canada, if the United States sneezes, we catch the cold. That's just the reality of the thing. Everything that we do, and we depend on the United States for a lot of things. This is why Trudeau thinks that the Chinese dictator is a good guy, because he's got more friendly with him than he has with the United States. It's crazy when you think of it in that way. So there's 4 notable ones. This is what the prophecy says. So it's talking about 4 kingdoms that are going to take the place of the United States. So who could this be? Well, it's really quite interesting. We don't have to even guess. In the UN, the way this goes on, the UN is a multinational. We all know that as a multinational. Almost you could call it a corporation that's made up of nations. And this came into being after the Second World War. It was kind of the prelude to this was the League of Nations in the early 1900s. But after the Second World War, it's kind of interesting how this developed. They wanted to put an end of war forever, and they wanted to have peacekeeping troops all over the world. And so they created this union of nations, and it's very interesting. It was the victors. They didn't invite Germany to be part of this council that would head up the UN. There's what they call 5 permanent members in the UN. Who are they? You can sort of see them there. The United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, and France. Who are these nations? They are the victors of the Second World War. So they set up a corporation. It's kind of like the guys with all the money and the ones that made the war a success. They got together and said, hey, let's do something. Let's end all these wars. Let's get together and form this corporation, and we will be the ones that govern this thing. Now, all the other nations, if they were approved, they came into the UN. But there's 5 permanent members. What does that mean? They have rotating members on the UN Security Council. But there's 5 permanent members. What does that mean? That means that they don't rotate their position. It's kind of like setting up a business between your family, and it's the husband and the wife and the child, and they are permanent members. You can't vote them out. You can't do anything with them. They are the ones that are going to run the show until they die. And so this is the way they structured the UN. There were 5 permanent members in these countries. Now, do you suppose today we could look at these countries today and say these are probably the most powerful nations in the world? Pretty reasonable to say that. Would you say these were notable nations? So in the prophecy, we see that there's a notable horn, and there's a notable horn that's broken, and we have 4 other nations that come up and take control and replace this notable horn. You see, nature hates a vacuum. And so when the notable horn is broken, there's a struggle for supremacy between these 4 nations. Can you actually see the possibility of that? Who's going to be number 1? So there's a tremendous struggle for number 1. This is what it talks about in Daniel chapter 10 through 12, a great war. And so at the beginning of this is the war with Islam, and then it turns into chaos from there in. And this is what Yeshua was speaking about. The first thing he said, there'd be war at the time of the end. Not just any old war, but we focus in on Daniel where he showed us to go. And we see that there's a war between the West primarily, which will engulf the whole world. But it's a war between the West and Islam. And so this is what we're looking at. We don't need to use our imagination to see the possibilities here. So when we have the United States broken, taken out of number 1 position, not only taken out of number 1 position, the description here is they will be reduced to less than a third world nation. So if the United States is reduced to a third world nation, what did Yeshua said that followed on the heels? Famine. So this is where we need to start realizing that here, especially in the West immediately, we need to make some kind of preparation where we're not going to starve to death. Because what's going to happen is the shipping lanes, this war, the magnitude of this war, is groceries are not going to be found at Save On Foods. Do you guys have Save On Foods here? Yeah. Is we're not going to be able to go and get our groceries the same way we can get our groceries now. It would be a good time to learn how to grow a potato. You know, I used to teach students between 20 and 30 years old, generally, and I'm not so sure that they actually know that potatoes need to go into the ground and they can pull them out of the ground when you can have a harvest. People have lost the art of gardening. They don't know how to do it. And so it would behoove us to start thinking along these terms is, how am I going to get through this? You see, the reason, and I say again, I say this a lot, I know I do, but I really need to make the point here, is this is not some sort of fear tactics. We don't want fear tactics. But Yeshua wasn't trying to scare us as much as warn us. He said, see, I've told you all things beforehand. And so we need to sort of start thinking on these terms. As we see this developing, we need to sort of think, what am I going to do when all this happens? So my first suggestion is, for everyone, is to really start networking. You know where it says in the Bible, especially as you see the day approaching, what are you supposed to do? Assemble yourselves together. That's have meetings. One of the purposes of meetings is, how are we going to get through this? And so as we network, because nobody can do this. We've got a camp. I'm going to show you some pictures here tonight of our camp and some of the things that we've been doing there. Some of the preparations we've been making for this time. And it's to encourage you to start thinking along those terms. Now, not everyone can do what we're doing. And I totally understand that. And not everyone is going to be called to do this. But I say, thank God that he's put it on the hearts for some to do it, because apparently, according to Yeshua, we're all going to have to take a flight at some point. So wouldn't it be nice to have somewhere to go other than a cave? What do you think? I wouldn't survive too much in a cave where I live, because I'd be cozying up to a grizzly bear or a black bear in the winter. All those caves get full of those critters, and that's not where I want to live out this time. But it says in the book of Revelation that the woman flees into the wilderness, and I like to take that literally, for a time, times and a half. If you're going to survive in the wilderness for a time, times and a half, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to have to grow your food, because you're going to be separated from the general public. Why are you going to be separated from the general public? Because there's going to be a persecution unlike any persecution that there ever has been on this planet. A final eradication of God's people in the time of the end. You know, they sort of term it as ethnic cleansing sort of thing. We hear that term. But it's going to be God's people will be cleansed from the earth. And so we're going to have to distance ourselves from the earth. And we've seen during the early time in Rome, when the Christians were persecuted, they went up into the mountains, and that's how they survived. And then they went into the cities, and they shared the truth of the gospel with those that were listening. And that those that listened, they would take them out to their encampments out in the mountains in the Alps to avoid the persecution that they all got. You can read about this in the history books. So if we understand that there's going to be a persecution greater than that took place in early Roman days, and when the Roman Empire, or the Christian Empire, ruled, the great persecution for about 1,000 years, we can learn a lot of lessons from that. And as they distance themselves, they preserve their lives. And that's what I believe the book of Revelation is talking about. So God has forewarned us of what is coming. So in the prophecy, it goes on to say, in place of the notable horn, 4 horns come up and take control, which I find very interesting. That happens to be the exact structure of the UN. So I'm not stretching. I'm trying to, we've got 6, and it's pretty close. We got, 5. We got 4. The numbers run pretty close. This is exactly accurate to the structure of the world. And isn't it rather appropriate, because we're told in Scripture that God knows the end from the beginning. So he knows exactly what's coming, and he's warned us. He hasn't given us names per se, but he's done something that is pretty close to that. In the time of Cyrus, actually about 100 years before Cyrus even was born, through the prophet Isaiah, he said, "My anointed Cyrus." Now that's kind of interesting. What was Cyrus? Who was Cyrus? Pardon me? He was a person, exactly. And he A Persian. Oh, sorry. Yeah, he was a person. He was a Persian, actually. Yeah. He was a Persian. And what was his role for God's people? You all know this. His role for God's people was announce it was time to build the temple. That didn't go over your head, did it? God announced that the Jews would be able to go back to their land through his anointed, who was a heathen king, and he called him his anointed, and he used a heathen king, someone that had a bad record, to tell the Jews that they could go home. And he not only told them they could go home, he said, I have an unlimited supply of gold. Tell me what you need, and I will supply the lack. Wow. We've got some history that's going to be repeated. When the Muslims are defeated and annihilated, what do you suppose will happen in Jerusalem? Other than rejoicing? Come on. Help me. Yeah. So I'm not making up the storyline as I go. It's like history repeats itself. We've got exactly the same thing. There's going to be a notable king once the war is over that will pave the way for Israel to build their temple. And that's what opens the door. You see, we can't have a temple unless we have a third world war. It's not possible. This concept that somehow Israel and the Muslims and the Christian can all have, I was talking to somebody this afternoon and they wanted to know my opinion. They said, you know, you've been pretty accurate on some prophecy and it looks like what you're saying is coming to pass. And I'm thinking, yeah, just keep watching. And he said, but those people that I'm listening to, it's a Messianic group, won't name the group, they're saying that, yeah, there's going to be a war with Islam. But the interesting part is, at the end of it, they're going to agree to each have a worship place on the Temple Mount. There's going to be a Christian worship place, there's going to be a Jewish worship place, and there's going to be a Muslim worship place. The problem is they're not reading the prophecy. There's no place for Islam in the New World Order. They're going to be put out of commission because ultimately, if we see in the book of Revelation, there is only going to be one state-approved religion. If the West defeats Islam, the only state religion that's going to be available or allowed will be a Christian religion because that's what the West is. The conservative Christian movement is going to grow and culminate in a New World Order religion. Russia, actually, Putin has been said, I've read articles, where he said that his closest ally is the Eastern Orthodox Church. Is that a Christian church? Absolutely. You know, it's interesting as we look through history, if the governmental powers can get control of the churches, then they can control the masses. Because the churches control the conscience of the people. That's the way it works. That's the way it's always worked. If you can gain control of the churches, you can gain control of the masses. That's why the government, you see, the whole plan is all laid down. That's why the government powers, how did they get Christians to accept the shot? How did they do it? Fear, yeah. I thought I heard something here. Churches. Churches. They were paying churches to set up places where people can get the shot at the churches. Wow, you've got the conservative people that should know better, and you've got the government working through the churches. That's what they've always done. This is exactly what they're going to do. This is what the New World Order is going to do. They're going to gain control over the churches, or is it the churches gaining control over the government? You see, they both rub each other's back and they will work together. This is the way it's always been done. This is the way it will finish up. That's the way Satan works. in Daniel chapter 7, when we start comparing Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8, we don't see the direct connection right off the top. But there's enough information in Daniel chapter 7 that we're not going to look at today, but there's enough information in Daniel chapter 7 that we can see the connections to Daniel chapter 8. The very most important connection that's very obvious is there's a little horn in both chapters. The little horn is found to make war against God's people. There's our connection. There's our immediate connection. There's a time frame that's involved in a little horn in chapter 8. It's called the 2300 evenings and mornings. There's also a time period in chapter 7 that's connected to the little horn. That's the times and a half. So we see these connections. But the other thing that we see, not right out of the gate, but we see the aftermath of the war. So we see Daniel chapter 8 picks up the beginning of the time of the end. That's the chapter that contains something about the abomination and desolation. That's where we went first. And we see that it begins with war. We see exactly where it is in the world that the war happens and how it develops with this Islam thing. Now we see in Daniel chapter 7, we see 4 beasts. Well, we did have 4 kingdoms that took charge in chapter 8. This vision picks up with a lion that has eagle's wings. But it says that the eagle's wings, now don't miss the concept that it tells us in the vision that these animals represent kingdoms. So it says here about this lion, it says that it has eagle's wings, and the eagle's wings were ripped off. And the lion had to stand on its own 2 feet like a man. So I believe that represents 2 kingdoms. Now, if I was to ask you, which kingdom in the world would be represented by an eagle? Any guesses? The first one's not going to count. This is kind of one of those games that you were playing. This one's going to be easy, he said. Is the United States ever represented by an eagle? Actually, it's quite interesting, and I don't think it took God by surprise, that the United States, actually, their national bird is an eagle. You see it everywhere on their flags. Sure, so this is pretty obvious. So this is paralleling Daniel chapter 8. We see something happens to the eagle. But the eagle is united at the time of the prophecy with a lion. Who could that possibly be? Is there any kind of a joining together of 2 nations, 2 most powerful nations in the world? Yeah, I hear Russia and Great Britain. Russia usually is represented by a different animal, a bear, which happens to be in the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7. So we see that the possibility of an eagle and a lion joined at the hip, so to speak, and the eagle is ripped off, and now the lion has to stand on its own 2 feet. England would never have separated, Brexit would have never happened if they didn't rely on the United States to make up the difference. Now, if you want to do some homework on that, and you're going to find out the United States was promising Great Britain, Trump was working with Great Britain all the way through that and said, hey, we're going to take care of you guys. Don't worry about this. Stay separated from Europe. Margaret Thatcher was heard saying, she was asked the question, will you ever be a real part of the EU? And she said that nothing good has ever come out of the European Union. She said, I will never join the European Union. Of course, the Second World War wasn't too far from her memory. And Napoleon and all these things happened in Europe, and they didn't want any part of it. And that really began the Brexit movement that happened, and they were supported by the United States, by the conservative part of the United States. And so this is what we're going to see here is England and the United States, the UK, working together more tightly as we see. So this is something that we're looking at, okay? So we're looking at that tight formation between the United States and Great Britain. But what does that also mean? There's an organization in the world called the Five Eyes. Do you know what that is? So who are they? United States, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, and wow. You see any common connection there? Canada as well. So you've got these 5 nations. What do they have in common?
Are they under the British Commonwealth?
Well, they were either part of or very connected to it, right? So they're the Anglo-Saxon Empire. Their roots, yeah, we better quit here. So here, this is what we're seeing. So we can see these developing nations, as they get more conservative, are going to go into their patriotic mode, and they want to survive. So they're going to be joined together. We're going to see much more of that as we go into the very near future. So let's stop now because we got supper time. All right. Father in heaven, we thank you again for our refreshments that we're going to enjoy, and we ask that you would continue to supply our needs, and we thank you for it. We pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen.